particular program that's available to everyone, and then I'll hand over to Keith, who'll do the presentation regarding the supply chain risk management. We'll have some questions and answers after that. And also, if we've got time, I'd just like to have a little bit of discussion about how COVID has impacted your business in supply chain terms. So that's the run sheet. As always, we've got to acknowledge our sponsors. So I don't know if Keith's got the slides up. I haven't got it up on my screen at the moment, but we're very grateful for those sponsors and supporters. We welcome a couple of new people who I think aren't on that list at the moment, so Gosford RSL and Milestone Bellanova, who are marketing organisations. So again, without these people supporting us, it makes it very difficult for us to operate. Just before we start off the presentation by Keith, I just wanted to talk about a training program that's available. It's called the Infection Control Training Program. It's provided by the New South Wales Department of Education. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the slide up in time for today's presentation, but basically it's a training program which is certainly eligible for manufacturers and particularly transport and logistics organisations as well. And it covers off hospitality and health and retail. But it covers off things like understanding infection, identifying infection risks, managing infection risks, and the compliance aspect. So if you can go to our website, centralcoastindustryconnect.com.au, and go into the news section, and you'll see the infection control article there, and that'll take you through to the into the flyer that will tell you how to enrol. I will send this out to everyone after the event. I just wanted to introduce Keith. So Keith's commonly known as the grants guy. He's done a lot of work in the grants area and particularly in supporting organisations and going for grants and so forth. But you know, through his works and through his travels, he's had a lot of experience with businesses and different elements of their businesses, and some of that experience has been around the supply chain. So what he's going to present today is, I suppose, the fundamentals of the supply chain risk, and it's probably a good time to have a look at this stuff, given that what's happened with COVID, and that's clearly been a big risk to a lot of supply chains. And so, yeah, look, I'm going to hand over to Keith to start that presentation, and bear in mind that after the presentation, we'll have Q&A and we can have some further discussion around what COVID has done. So I'll hand over to Keith. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Much appreciated. Great to be here. And let's talk about supply chain risk management. And as Frank's saying, I'm not proclaiming myself as the identifiable expert, but I'm just talking about this in terms of my clientele and cohort when I've talked to them about their grants and their tenders, their business processes, and something that's come up again and again and again, detrimentally, unfortunately, as part of their tender, bid management process and grants as well, where they don't have a quantifiable supply chain risk management process. Certainly most funding bodies want to see a quantifiable risk management process, but I see a lot of impediments. I've seen a lot of issues with supply chain risk management processes in organizations I've worked with across the Central Coast, basically. And it's really about having a plan and being proactive, not reactive. And now is a great time, as Frank said, to look at SCRM in your own business, basically in your organization. As a recap, and it's an evolutionary process, obviously, it's about looking at it. A lot of businesses that I've worked with have done it very articulately, but never looked at it again. And you should be looking at least once a year, and you should be looking at, obviously, in terms of what's happening in terms of your service sector, both your suppliers and your retailers and every other facet of your business as well. Strictly speaking, this is the definition, is the coordinated efforts of an organization to help identify, monitor, detect, and mitigate threats to supply chain continuity and profitability. And I would focus on those four key words: identification, monitoring, detecting, and mitigating. And I'd put them up on the whiteboard, and that's what you're adhering to in everything you're doing in terms of your business process and your supply chain risk management modus operandi as a business at the end of the day. Obviously, threats are wide and varied, so they include cost volatility, material shortages, supplier financial issues, and failures and natural and man-made disasters. And obviously we're going through one of those at the moment with COVID-19 and the impact it's having on manufacturers and the attainments of supplies from overseas or even domestically. So I'm going to stick to those 4 words. That's your mantra, really. Identification, monitoring, detection, and mitigating. Should be doing that daily, weekly, monthly, annually as a business, basically, in terms of your supply chain, but also your business operations as well. So prepare, react, recover, basically, okay? And it's really talking about that preparation, reaction to your preparation, and recovering to that at the end of the day. And then the supply chain, I really like the supply chain security, about your physical security, your personal security, your ocean container truck trailer security, your IT security, procedure security. In other words, your security comes in many different shapes and forms. You need to ascertain what all aspects of your business need to ascertain your supply chain security. Okay, is it your facilities? Is it your employees? Is it basically, obviously, your import export, your IT, which I'm going to talk about a lot now in terms of cybersecurity and supply chain risk management, which came up at a forum I was at in Canberra 2 weeks ago, and what's happening now to that sector and the undue influence that's happening, but people don't have a correct and proper and appropriated supply chain risk management plan for their IT processes. You need to quantify and qualify. Do you need all of these? Do you need some of these? In some way, shape, or form, you need some of these as a business. But you need to look at basically what you have and what you need in terms of security for your business. Quintessentially, how you're managing that risk from the whole way through, from raw materials, your supplier, your manufacturing, your distribution, your customer, your consumer. Not just 1 or 2, but all. Now, some of those you'll have more overt influence on, obviously, inherently what you're in control of yourself. But outside of that, basically, how are you understanding how you mitigate and mediate those other components to risk and supply chain risk in your organization and external to your organization, and enact that as part of your MOU and contract of agreement with your suppliers the whole way through that process. Because again, this is the screenshot you should be printing out, laminated, sticking it on the management fridge at work. This is the whole supply chain. There will be other aspects to it, obviously, you need to look at inherently. For me, it's a great screenshot to look at, right, I need to be managing and appropriating risk in my supply chain to varying degrees across all aspects of this process. So risk identification, risk assessment, risk steering, and risk monitoring, 4 biggies in terms of basically what is your risk process. And there's many different risk processes out there. You can source them from the web. This is one of the ones I prefer to actually talk to my clients about, identifying risk. What's their plan to identify risk internally and externally in their organization? How are they assessing, reviewing, appraising, evaluating risk to varying size and nature in their organization? How are they steering away from risk? How are they managing it? How are they appropriating it? Is it a policy document? Is it enacting it in some way, shape, or form? Is it someone charged within the organization to manage risk in some way, shape, or form? And then monitoring constantly and consistently, not just doing it as a one-off, what I see a lot of organizations are, again, being reactive rather than being proactive. I need you to think about being proactive all the time, every time. And measuring it to different varying sizes and natures. And this is where I see a lot of problems with businesses, that it becomes an ad hoc. You need to think about basically measuring risk to what scale and nature, to what value it is to your business. Because as I said, going back to what I deal with in terms of grants and tenders, government always wants you to appropriate risk, and how you're showing indicatively how you're managing risk, which means everything from a SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, to your gap analysis, to industry competitor analysis, to your risk matrix, because they're risk averse, and rightly so. Any stakeholder, shareholder is going to be risk averse in terms of, I want to see quantifiable risk and how you're appropriating it basically rather than misappropriating it. So find a way now through your supply chain risk management process, even if you have it, congratulations, well done, upscale it, update it, make sure it's doing the job it should be doing for you in terms of being an ardent and articulate risk management process that suits your business at the end of the day. Otherwise, I find this with a lot of clients that I work with, they walk the line. All right, it's a fine balancing act. They basically, they run the line, the she'll be right mentality, we'll deal with a problem when the problem occurs. It's having the foresight to have the problem. Now, no one could have envisaged or foreseen COVID-19, but some of the businesses and some of the articulate businesses I've worked with have planned and have a risk mitigation strategy against certain acts to certain degrees, whether it be outside economic influences, a downturn, a recession, anyway, or other mitigating circumstances, and they've quantified that in their supply chain risk management. Not to the degree of COVID, obviously, but again, now it's how you learn from this. You know, the 2 words we're coming out of COVID are consolidation and pivoting, yeah? So really as a business, now you should learn from how I need to move forward because of COVID, and how I need to have an articulate SCRM in my business, basically supply chain risk management process, and now how can I enact it or update it to what it should be? And what you should be measuring basically, and what you're appropriating against risk severity and your opportunity to risk basically as well. And I've just given kind of 3 different indexes there, red, blue, and green, in terms of different ways to quantify and qualify your matrix of what risk is. Okay, and this would be constantly interchangeable. It will obviously be looking at updating it continually as a business as well, and looking at different factors and where they change basically from strategic suppliers to key suppliers, managed suppliers, and where that risk may change on different bases and on different timeframes as well. You need something like that as a risk matrix to quantify and qualify what you need to do and how you need to do it. Very much that visual infographic to show indicatively, right, this is ever changing. It's a very fluid market at the moment. There's going to be outside influences and factors that are going to affect my suppliers and the different range of my suppliers as well. And then the external factors to risk, right? So we quantify them as demand, environment, and supply. Okay, so demand, your loss of major accounts, volatility of demand, concentration of customer base, short life cycles, innovative competitors are overlapping you, taking you with better processes and procedures and service delivery capabilities. Buying too much or too little. Environment, basically natural disasters, which we're going through at the moment to a certain degree. Obviously, a lot of people are affected by the bushfires in New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria, let alone what happened with COVID-19. Terrorism or war, regulatory changes, which you should be prepared for as much as anything else, what government are advocating and mandating. Tax, duties, and quotas, and strikes, obviously, industrial action. And supply, dependency on key suppliers. Obviously now what's happened with that because of COVID-19, can you get your product, can you get your services to do the manufacturing component? The downtime, consolidation in supply markets, quality risks, potential disruption, and replenishment lead times and variability. All of factors now we're encompassing, certainly there's a lot of manufacturers out there at the moment because of COVID-19. So learn from this, use these basically as a learning point now to consolidate your business in terms of SCRM and what needs to happen move forward basically. What's happened is what happened with COVID-19. It's learning from it and saying, never again shall I be caught basically with inadequate SCRM process, okay? And your internal factors, which people forget about. Everyone just focuses on the external with SCRM basically, and it's really the internal is just as inherent as well, because that can bring down your organization from the inside per se. Your processes, your manufacturing yield, your variability and quality, lengthy setup times, inflexible processes, equipment reliability, limited capacity and bottlenecks, outsourcing key business processes, product complexity, and then risk response contingency, your awareness, prevention, remediation, and knowledge. Again, 4 big key points for me as a business manager, as a CEO, as a COO, basically. Awareness, what's happening internally in your organization as much as externally. Prevention, what preventative measures you're going to take and have the lead-in time to do that. The remediation, basically, how you're going to counteract that through remediation. And your knowledge, your industry transferable knowledge, basically. Are you aware of marketplace, what's happening internally? Modus operandi, best way of doing this, best service model that should be articulated within your business. And your controls, your poor pipeline visibility, inappropriate rules that distort demand, lack of collaborative planning and forecasts, bullwhip effects due to multiple echelons and proprietary technology. I'm seeing a lot in the lack of collaborative planning forecasts, okay? Left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. You need to be looking this together as a management team, basically. One person's very hard to control SCRM. There needs to be other factors coming into it. Someone from finance, maybe someone from marketing and comms, someone from manufacturing, someone from customer service, whatever the case may be. Each are value adds to this at the end of the day, okay? What business should be measuring really, right? Define your most important vendors, establish guidelines and controls for consistent process, integrate with your organization's assessment and audit practices, and assess your current supply chain management program. 4 things, not too much to ask, but it's a starting point. Even if it's a reiteration point, even if it's something you've constantly done, keep doing it and update it continually, basically, as best practice in industry modeling and what needs to happen basically for your business at the end of the day, okay? Classifying that high risk landscape, how are you even classifying it? I love this basically from Gartner, whereby they talk about classifying the risk landscape across high frequency and low frequency and low impact and high impact, basically. How are you measuring risk in your organization? Different models out there, find one, adapt it, utilize it. As I said at the outset of the webinar, I'm just not seeing that best practice planning. A lot of stuff is reactive rather than proactive. It's nearly, as I said, we'll wait for a risk to occur and then we'll have a risk mitigation strategy. Okay, too late in the day. That horse is bolted. All right, so now is the time, if we're consolidating because of COVID, sit down and plan for how you're going to come alive again as a business, basically, not just this year, but next year, more importantly. Okay. Time and capacity is the biggest issue to do that as a business though. And I talk about this inherently in every facet of my services that I provide as a consultant. And this is what I'm seeing all the time with my clients and customers, is time to do it and capacity to deliver it, time to conceptualize it and capacity to deliver it. This is going to be your biggest impediment. Not financing, not resourcing, it's time and capacity. Time to sit down and plan it, and your capacity to roll it out. Okay? So it's great planning it, that's theory, but then you got to put it into practice. Time and capacity. So the problem is really the supply chain transparency is hard or even impossible to achieve. It is, even in perfect circumstances. In modern multi-tier supply chain, hundreds of thousands of suppliers may contribute to a single product. Correct. So how do you manage all that? You can't. You only can manage as much as you can. So with your internal and external, what I've talked about, those risk matrix models that I've shown you previously, you need to manage as much as you can. Don't get into your head you're going to manage 100% of this, because you can't. There's going to be extraneous circumstances outside of what you can do and plan. But plan basically to 70, 80, 90% value as best you can, basically. In other words, just have a plan. Even identifying the full set of suppliers from raw material sources to a final assembled system can require significant time investment, which is what I'm saying about time and capacity. Okay, this is not going to happen overnight for your business. So you need to look at this, and then not only do you need to plan it, enact it, you need to actually measure it and evaluate it and to see it's actually working, rather than just saying we have an SCRM. Well, how are you measuring and appropriating that's actually working for you, not against you? The scope and scale of risks is intimidating because there's so many, obviously. The probability and severity of many risks is difficult to ascertain. So you need to ask some optimal questions that are pertinent to your business. So one's indicative, like how likely are certain weather patterns going to affect my production, particularly in terms of agriculture per se? How often will a supplier's employee be careless in cybersecurity practices, which I'm going to come to later on as well, and therefore difficult to address, quantify, and mitigate all those factors at the end of the day. Okay. Even proprietary data restrictions impede progress. So in complex products, tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers may consider their supply chains to be proprietary, limiting visibility at the purchaser or instigated manufacturing level. Again, so your IP, your intellectual property, how much you need, how much you want, basically, how's that an impediment for you if you're not getting all the information you need to actually deliver the product or manufacture the product. So known and unknown risk can be identified and impossible to measure and manage over time. For instance, supplier bankruptcy leading to a disruption in supply would be a known risk. Its likelihood can be estimated based on supplier's financial history and impacting your organization, be quantified against consideration of products and services. So you can have the foresight, you can look back at what's happening in the marketplace with your competitors, with your suppliers. Again, that's back to time and capacity. Again, people are reactive. They're not necessarily looking at the right documentation to be reading through. They're not giving themselves the right time to read through that relevant documentation to identify those key risks, basically, and that roadmap to where indicatively they shouldn't be partnering or utilizing that entity in the supply chain, basically, because inherently they've dropped the ball and they've poor financial planning and they're operating at a loss. Why would I want to work with them? Should invest time in a cross-functional team. That's what I'm talking about. SCRM is not just one person. Okay, it delves into different facets of your business. So optimally, you're looking at 3 to 4 people meeting at least once a month, talking about what's going right, what's going wrong in the business, basically, and how you're using SCRM modeling and SCRM best practice to actually roll out what you should be doing as a business, not what you want to do as a business, but what you should be doing as business. To catalog the full scope of risk they face, building a risk management framework. Again, when I talk to a lot of business out there and I ask for a copy of that, they look at me blankly. Okay, determines which metrics are appropriate for measuring risk, what looks good for each metric, and how to rigorously track and monitor these metrics, most importantly. This team can also identify gray areas where risks are too hard to understand or define, and analysis can measure the scale and scope of unknown risks. Again, mission impossible to do this on your own. You really need to think inherently how I'm going to use the full facets of my resources within my business, basically, or even externally, your bookkeeper, your accountant, your lawyer, to look at different aspects and components of your supply chain. So for a known risk, reducing the probability and increasing the speed of response when they do occur is critical to sustaining competitive manage. So A, have a plan in the first instance. B, have a fluidity of plan to be able to, when those risks do occur, you actually be able to enact it rather than the wheel turns slowly. You're very much, again, a proactive rather than reactive organization. Okay, building strong layers of defense combined with risk-aware culture can give an organization this advantage. which is training, upskilling, management, employees, customers, clients on risk-aware culture. All right, and not just for yourselves, but the whole holistic approach to your business. Basically, all facets and all people that are involved in your business should be aware that you are risk averse. Give them that reassurance that they should be buying your product, utilizing your services. But inherently, obviously, this is something you're going to talk through your HR and your training with your employees as well, to say, look, this is how we're building a risk averse culture here, and I want you to be part of this. Okay, that inclusive rather than exclusive. So managing those known risks, basically. Okay, so identify and document those risks. Again, you know, it may seem blatantly obvious, right, to actually write down now on a blank piece of paper or on your screen on your laptop, what are the risks that are determinable to this business? Yet people don't do it, again, because it's reactive rather than proactive. Typical approach to risk identification is to map out and assess the value chains for all major products, each node of supply chain, as they say, suppliers, plants, production, warehouses, transport routes, and then assess each of them in detail. Risks are entered into a risk register, as we showed you earlier on, and tracked rigorously on an ongoing basis. In this step, parts of the supply chain where no data exists and further investigations required should also be recorded. Don't just leave a gaping hole there with TBC. Okay, needs to be acted on. That's really what you need to stick to, because you want to determine those factors that are really going to impede you. Basically, you're trying to do an investigation, private investigation into, you know, here's what I think are the factors, but here's really determinable factors that are causing me to strife within the business. Okay, build a supply chain risk management framework. Okay, so again, you're going to get a copy of this, guys, so feel free, and girls, if you feel that you want to take notes, feel free to do so. If you want to take a screenshot, feel free to go right ahead and do that, but you will get a copy of this recording so you can go back through at your own discretion as well. Build a supply chain risk management framework, which is the big piece of advice I want you to go away with today. If you have one, fantastic, well done. Update it, which I don't see a lot of businesses necessarily doing. They have it, and then it just sits there redundantly, not doing the job that it should be doing as SCRM, okay? Every risk in the register should be scored based on 3 dimensions to build an integrated risk management framework, which is the impact on the organization if the risk materializes, the likelihood of the risk materializing, and the organization's preparedness to deal with that specific risk. They would be the 3 categories I would advocate you to look at as a business. And it's critical to design and use consistent methodology and assess all risks. Okay, so be mindful of all that. Okay, just ask people to mute themselves if they could, just so there's no background noise when I'm talking. That's great, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. Thank you very much. So monitor risk. Once a risk management framework is established, persistent monitoring, and I can't advocate that enough today. Basically, continual approach to this, not a one-off approach. Okay, critical success factors in identifying risks that may damage your organization or business. It's critical to have an early warning system to track top risks to maximize the chances of mitigating or at least limiting the impact of the occurrence. Now, blatantly obvious, we all know this, we're all well versed in business basically. But again, I see too many businesses being reactive rather than proactive. And then they worry how they basically have to deal with this, or basically wonder why it occurred, because they didn't have the visage or the plan to actually envisage it, let alone deal with it. Okay. Institute governance and regular review. The final critical step, as I said, there is to set up a robust governance mechanism to periodically review supply chain risks and define mitigating actions, improving the resilience and agility of the supply chain. And that's what you're trying to do with your supply chain. SCRM is all about improving your resilience as a business across all layers of your business. All right, and that's a good review to do as a business all the time, every time, let alone annually. Okay, so an effective supply chain management governance mechanism is a cross-functional risk board, right, where participants representing every node of the value chain. As I said, you need to look at all aspects of identified risk in your organization and all those people that are associated with the risk factors in your organization, and combine the two and look at how to have a policy, a plan, a procedure, a matrix to mitigate risk in your organization. So as I say, there's typically the line managers who double hat as risk owners of their function, giving them the ownership of risk identification and mitigation of the plan and the training that they've been given in the first instance. Okay, then they can do their job. All right. In most cases, the risk board, so that cohort of people within your business, receives additional support from a central risk management function, usually senior management team, staff with experts to provide additional guidance in identifying and mitigating risks. Again, as I said, continual updating process, not just this one-off thing. We've done it once, we never have to do it again. Okay, so charge your managers, charge your employees with owning the risk, but obviously give them the power to do the risk identification and the mitigation at the same time through training and upskilling as well, you know, and that's what I'm finding have to do with a lot of my clients as well, do that one-day workshop with them. Building strong defenses from request for proposal language to worker training all contribute to an organization identifying and stopping unknown risks before they affect operations. And again, I'm going to stick to that narrative all the time, every day today. Then again, I just don't see enough of planning really in a lot of organizations that I work with about building those strong defenses. Yeah, the she'll be right mentality, we'll get to it in the end, it'll be all right in the night. It won't. And we've learned that, if anything, from COVID-19, basically, and now moving forward in a perceivable economic downturn. So you need to think about now consolidating, as I said, and pivoting from a practice that doesn't work for your SCRM to what should work for your SCRM. A risk-aware culture. So it's great having the policy, the procedure, the plan, without having the culture. It's yin without yang. All right, you need to think about balancing this by you instigate your training, updating, skilling your actual cohort of your workers and your management team, that you have a risk-aware culture within your organization all the time, every time, and maintain those strong defensive layers against perceivable risk and unknown risk, and how to deal with them basically across a multi-platform as well. Okay, it's the only way that SCRM is going to work in your organization. Acknowledgement. Meal empowered, basically, again, this is about communication, which people don't think about in SCRM, basically, that if an employee or a manager sees something, they have a process to identify it, bring it to the attention of the senior management team, how to deal with that, basically, and opens up that fostering environment, basically, and clear lines of communication and transparency. Okay, that's what we want to see, basically. All right, it's not just your role to identify risk as a risk manager, it's everyone's role to identify risk as a risk manager per se, on top of what they're doing as well. So culturally, it's very important. This comes back to organizational culture in your organization, okay? And that it works. If it works well, then it works effectively. If it's this ad hoc roller coaster, it's not going to work, and those risks are going to slip between the cracks and going to exacerbate further as risks. Transparency. Leaders should clearly define and communicate an organization's risk tolerance, right? Risk mitigation often has an associated incremental cost. So it's important to align on which risks need to be mitigated and which can be borne. Because some should be borne, all right? But you've got to quantify that to different barriers. So it's like the traffic lights, all right? Red, not at all. Yellow, maybe. Green, we can definitely absorb ourselves, basically. The organization's culture should allow for warning signs for both internal and external risks to be openly shared. How are you identifying risks? How are you mitigating risks? All right, again, transparency across the organization, not just one person's role or responsibility. Okay, responsiveness, how quickly you respond to risk. And again, I see a lot of probably risk gestate within organizations, unfortunately. All right, to just exacerbate further and further and further and further, not where you want to be as an organization. They need to be empowered and perceived and react rapidly to external change and internal change as well. This could be enabled by creating an ownership environment, as I've talked about previously, where members feel responsible, as in staff, for outcome and actions and decisions. All right, that holistic approach again, not just basically one person owns all the problems. Too overwhelming, too overbearing, not where you want to be basically as an organization at the end of the day. Okay. Respect. All right, interesting word to use with SCRM, obviously, but it's understanding and empowering, as I said previously, the people that work for you, with you, and understanding they see the value in determining risk as much as you do for a business, in terms of business sustainability, in terms of business innovation, and best practice at the end of the day, basically. So, you know, stick to these, what I talk about: respect, responsiveness, transparency, acknowledgement, and you're going to do quite well, basically, as a way of building your SCRM modeling and enacting it at the same time, okay? So the PPRR risk management model, basically prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery, is something I like to abide by all the time from my own business, let alone when I'm talking to my clients and customers. Take precautionary measures for supply chain risk mitigation. Preparedness, develop and implement a contingency plan in case of emergency. Response, execute your own contingency plan in order to reduce the impact of disruptive event. And recovery, resume operations, get things running at normal capacity as quickly as possible, depending on internal and external factors as well. So PPRR is a fantastic model to use, only though fantastic if you end up using it in practical implementation as such, rather than theory about making it practical at the same time, okay? So it's about supply chain security. I want to talk about a little bit now before we move on to questions. And this is something that's come up more and more, obviously, with certainly cyber supply chain security, and with the factors that are happening around that now more than ever before, basically. And again, you need to go through this matrix of, your cyber supply chain risk management. So you're growing your sophistication of ICT, what's happening out, the number and scale of information systems that you're accessing, other entities are accessing that you're part of, reliance on costs, speed and scale of globalization, complex supply chain, obviously out there, even more geographically and logically. A significant increase in number of entities with touch products and services, natural disasters, lack of visibility, lack of control. I could go on, all right? There's a huge amount, but cyber supply chain and cyber impediments now to your supply chain and SCRM are huge and need to be monitoring, appraising how people are accessing your information, your data, how does that lead to an impediment basically in what you're doing as well, okay? And then even, as we've seen, industrial espionage as well, basically. So BAE systems talk about this to this. I mean, if it's big enough for BAE, good enough for BAE, it's good enough for the rest of us. They talk about, you know, SCRM as a cybersecurity sense, its real world implications for them as a business. They've seen an increasing number of cases, including theft of intellectual property, direct commercial advantage, brand and reputational damage, and national damage for them as well, basically. So they've had increasingly attacks on the supply chain, not just end entity. Does pose concern to national security, which is going to be a concern for government, obviously, the economy overall, and for them, obviously, with their defense and defense suppliers in terms of the area of operations they work in and the service sector they work in. So what I take from that you, even whatever operations you're in, whatever business sector you're in, should be looking at the same articulate way that BAE are looking at. Obviously, defense is a more growing concern for a government, but even for you, you should be looking at what's happening with cyber supply chain problems and issues identifiably as well. Businesses have been exposed now to cybersecurity threats such as malware, ransomware, phishing, and hacking. Environmental risk can further compound these vulnerabilities as well. So you're now going to have to factor into your SCRM modeling, your cyber supply chain risk management process as part of that as well, okay? So you need to establish compliance standards for all third-party vendors, including manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors. You need to define user roles and implement security roles to restrict who is able to access your system and what level of clearance they've been given, and perform a thorough vendor risk assessment prior to signing any contracts with them. Okay, 3 identifiable steps to take at the outset, okay? Then implement data stewardship standards that define who owns certain data and what they're to do with the data. Provide comprehensive training for all employees about cybersecurity protocols, and implement a software solution that provides you with total visibility into your supply chain so you can quickly identify unusual activity as it occurs. This is a blatant going concern. You need to be live to this threat right now as a business, because in some way, shape or form, even as businesses, we operate in this cyber world in what we do, whether it's our websites, our production channels, our interactions, and this can affect us gravely. So I want you to be wary of this in part of your SCRM, as I said. Work with vendors in your supply chain network to develop unified disaster recovery plans to ensure business continuity across your whole SCRM network. Establish backup controls to safeguard your data backups, and regularly update your company's antivirus, anti-spyware, and firewall software solutions, okay, all the time. So get people in IT across this now. They are, I'm sure they are already for you, basically, and warning you such and implementing the measures that need to be taken into account. But this is a real going concern, and I'm raising it because having been at the conference myself 2 weeks ago with government in Canberra, and certainly when I talk to a lot of my clients and customers, again, it comes up in an ad hoc or latter approach whereby it should be right up there now, given the amount of interaction we use through cyberspace for our manufacturing and production. The road ahead, so it's critical for organizations now, I feel, to build robust programs for managing both known and unknown supply chain risks. Leaders should also recognize that risk management is not merely about setting up processes and governance models, but entails shifts in culture and mindset. And that's probably one of the biggest issues you're going to have, certainly if you're going to pivot it or change it in some way, shape, or form, your SCRM modeling now. How's it going to be adapted culturally and mindset-wise within your organization, let alone by your customer and by your production channels as well. But by employing these approaches, organizations increase their chances of minimizing supply chain distributions and crisis while capturing the full value of their supply chain strategies. Okay, and that's me, folks. Happy to open it up for questions now and comments. I know Frank wants to say some more as well. Thank you very much for attending this morning. As I said, you will be getting a copy of this recording as well, so I hope you haven't been furiously taking notes too much and you've been able to listen to what I've said. I'm also on LinkedIn as well if you want to join me there, but they're my contact details. Happy to take up any following questions or comments now. Frank, over to you. Got to Yeah, unmute yourself, Frank.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. There we go. That's better. So, any questions for Keith? No.
No.
Keith, Mark Jones here, mate. If we can agree that supply chain risk management is a compliance-driven initiative, one of the things I've seen as a consultant playing in this space as well is that quite often in that SME environment, a lot of business owners don't have the skills, the knowledge, the expertise. So they go gangbusters, go ho, all in hard. And it gets to a point where they almost choke the organisation to death. They actually stifle productivity because they become that risk adverse. So there is a fine line, as you suggested before, in terms of getting that balance right. So there's a number of aspects of supply chain risk management in terms of supplier capability and capacity, and also ensuring that they've got the risk controls in place as well. So do you have a framework or a template or a scoring matrix that would assist SMEs in determining whether an appropriate third-party supplier was a good fit for their organisation or would potentially be at risk?
I do, Mark, and thank you for your question. I do, and I supply that on a case-by-case basis, but certainly if I can resource it, I'm happy to make that as part of this package and made available as well, that we can syndicate out through what Frank's going to be sending out later on. Yes, I do, because we have to, as you said, with that modelling, and it's a very valid point you raised. You can get too risk-averse, and everything is a perceivable risk, basically, and you can go too far in this process. You need objectivity as much as productivity in terms of your SCRM, basically, and you need to stand back, and that's where you or I or anyone else, basically, in what we do, basically, you need objective third party to come in and go, in terms of what you're doing, basically, and going, because you never see the wood from the trees in your own business. And I have that myself. I mean, I have my own business mentor, I have my own business coach, because sometimes I don't see it. I just don't. I'm too busy caught up in doing it. I don't see it. I need that objectivity. But yeah, I'll certainly resource it. I have that I give, and I give it on a case-by-case, different sectors I do, because it's tangibly different in different sectors. But I'll try and find the generic one that I use, and certainly I'm happy to share that as part of my presentation today if I can source that, yeah.
Okay, very good.
Any other questions? No? Great. Well, thanks, Keith. I just wanted to, just as an extension of what Keith was talking about, and just wanted to hear from anyone that's had issues because of COVID in their supply chain, just getting materials or any issues at all. Is anyone prepared to have a chat about that? Even if you're not impacted, and why you haven't been impacted?
Oh, quiet for a Monday. Must have been a good weekend.
I think in general terms, things are taking longer. That end-to-end life cycle in terms of procurement, that's pretty atypical across a number of sectors at the moment. Even where I'm working at the moment with some government contracts, to actually get to that point of sign-off, there's, I don't know if government's distracted in terms of COVID's obviously the #1 priority for all state and federal jurisdictions, but to move from A to B to C in terms of contracts negotiation and sign-off is taking a lot longer than what it used to.
I concur, Mark. Yeah, it's a very good point. It's a very procrastinated process, unfortunately, at the moment, but that's the nature of the beast. And I think we're going to be a while coming out of that, as you rightly said. And I think we just got to roll with the punches to a certain degree. But at the same time, that's a great opportunity for these SMEs that you talked about, and particularly SMEs, I think. I think they're the ones that are really established businesses. I think this is modus operandi for them, basically. As I said throughout the webinar, that are very much as a standard practice. But the SMEs need to look at this as an opportunity while they're waiting and dealing with government, to really look at how to make them more streamlined and effective in terms of SCRM, basically moving forward in terms of that lead to better sustainability for the business and more innovative best practices around SCRM as well.
Yep.
So a few comments coming through. Carlos, did you want to say something?
Yeah, we one of the things that you've hit on is that there's been a lot of extension of timeframes and lead times. And one of the internal risks that we have now is that some of those lead times have tripled. And that now causes a lot of pressure on the planning aspect of the supply chain, where we've got a lot of risk that we could either oversupply or overpurchase or undersupply and underpurchase. To give you a case in point, one of our critical raw materials or componentry has gone out to a lead time of over 8 months. So for us to plan that far ahead, being in the fast-moving consumer good industry, you could well imagine that there's a huge potential of risk that we could blow out our cash to purchase cycle, we can blow out our DIFOT, we can blow out a number of aspects of what the supply chain is critical for.
Okay, great. I've seen a few comments have come in through the chat, so yeah, people can see that. I know certainly from the food industry perspective, and I've had a chat with all the major food companies just recently, certainly the global companies, because of their global existence, they had foresight into what was coming. So a lot of them actually started increasing their safety stocks, particularly materials. And really the only concerns I have at the moment are probably just delays in freight. But I do know the contracts, what you were saying, Mark, that was definitely just a general comment with businesses, you know, government contracts seem to be a bit slow coming on board. But, you know, they are there, and I think there will be an influx of work that will eventually come through.
Yep.
Is there anyone else who'd like to pass comment or just put something in the chat box so we can share it with everybody? I see Bruce has asked the question, Keith, which area of risk do you see as the biggest issue of business today? IT or physical or people risks?
Good question.
It is a good question. Can I say all? It is all to begin with, but IT, that's why the last couple of slides I really wanted to highlight that today. Basically, I got blown out of my shoes with the conference that I attended 2 weeks ago in Canberra, basically by a number of industry experts, from both public and private sector, talking about how cybersecurity and the lack of it across supply chain, let alone across all business sectors. And some of the stats and facts they were throwing out was just alarming, to be honest with you. And some of the case studies they were throwing out that affected Australian industry and manufacturing were alarming. So I really want to highlight cyber, but not to the detrimental nature of the other two. That you need to get the other two right and look at where you are with them, basically, even with cyber at the same time. So this is back to time and capacity again. How are you going to do this, and how are you going to get people to help you to do this basically over the time you have now? So I'm looking at, as we talked about earlier on, consolidation. There has to be some way now. You need to say, draw a line. This is what we're doing. We're reviewing, assessing where we are in terms of physical business or people in terms of SCRM. This is the stepped approach we're going to take. This is the roadmap, and this is the definitive endpoint that we're going to have conceptualizing the program and the initiative and then rolling it out basically. So I'm giving a lot of timeframes to my clients now for Christmas to get a lot of this done by Christmas basically, because otherwise I know themselves inherently, if they're going to, and I'm talking to SMEs the whole way up to established businesses, that if they leave it into the new year, it's just going to trail off and something else will come in, and factoring in something else will come out of left field at the same time. But I'm really, I won't say overtly concerned about IT or cyber, but it's definitely more an ardent concern we need to be wary of now.
Well, particularly there's been some recent attacks through this period and hit a couple of food companies. So I think it's definitely a concern, and it's going to be ongoing as more supply chains get integrated, and that's all done via IT. So, you know, there's going to be the challenges there. So
Definitely.
Anyone else with comments?
Frank, I think what you said there was spot on. I work for a large global company, and we procure from over 70 suppliers across 20 countries, and we had very good visibility on what was happening around the world. And because of that, because of the insight, we were able to place orders for our top 100 products, and we actually found ourselves to be in a really good position with respect to inventory, and we were able to manage our freight and logistics spend across the period really well. So having that foresight and the global footprint really helped our company.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's I've spoken to a few globally based businesses here in the region, and they are way ahead in terms of where they are in terms of production, and really no impact. Their biggest issue has been that, you know, particularly in the food space, the demand's been so great. I mean, normally, and I've worked in the food industry pretty well all my life, when you do Christmas, you pretty well pre-build and gear up for it 2 or 3 months out. Well, they had Christmas for 2 months straight without any warning. So you can see why we had shortages, but and even at one organisation, they used to the warehouse would probably hold 20,000 cases or 20,000 pallets, sorry, and they had 2 pallets left in the warehouse. So, but they managed, and because they had some of that insight, and getting the raw materials is key, and I think that's critical because if you don't get the raw materials, you can't produce. But then there were some smart things done as well, particularly in the food space, for example. You can always tweak your ingredient listing you can tweak the ingredients within your ingredient listing, to be able to cover off a shortage in a material or an ingredient without having too much of impact on the product. So some smart things, some good pivoting ideas.
Yep.
It's interesting times. Any other comments? I see Joanne, in case of COVID, has shown the fragility of the supply chain from our own suppliers, which becomes ours as well. Yeah, it's been an interesting time, has shown us that we have been reactive, regrettably. Again, if you don't have those insights, those global backups, then you can obviously very quickly get caught. But then you can, within the industry sector you operate in, if you're not a global organisation, the opportunity is to tap into those global networks so you can see what's coming down the line. I think that's you've got to use all this information to reduce risk. And there's plenty of stuff out there. You just need to be tapped into it and spend the time just taking heed of it. So.
Yeah, what Joseph said is a great case in point, and thanks for sharing that, Joseph. It's fantastic to have that learning from an organisation of understanding and work, and that's why I used the BAE slide, because BAE were very open and transparent about cybersecurity, obviously because it's so pertinent to the defence sector and obviously to national and international governments. I think we're seeing a lot more of that, and as Frank said, there's resources out there, so there's a lot of industry reading you can do around SCRM and cyber component to that as well. So a lot of these resources are out there and freely available to access in through published articles in journals and industry resources, basically. So just check them out and read through them and be upskilled.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay, well, that's great. Well, look, I just wanted to just have a chat about future events. So as most of you would know, we're part of the Central Coast Supply Chain Logistics Forum, alongside with Foresights and the Entrepreneurs Program. So I was speaking with Steve Rose late last week, and as a to sort of succeed this, or to follow on from this presentation, we were looking at whether there was any interest at looking at in detail. We get some specialists in around whether it's MRP or inventory control or sales and operations planning, which are all part of this this drive to secure your supply chain. So I don't know if people are interested; they can stick up a hand or whatever they've got. But I'm quite happy to work with Steve to try to run some specialist topics around this whole supply chain. Okay, we've got a couple there. Anyone else? Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Okay, Bruce, thank you. Amy, thank you. People are just working out where. Rodney, thanks. Yeah, just working out where the fingers button is. Fingers up button. So it's all good. So look, we'll work on that. So clearly, the supply chain forums have been disrupted because of COVID. But look, it's a great time to talk about this stuff because I think COVID's highlighted the issues of supply chain and the reliance, particularly if you're dealing with materials coming from overseas, or if you're not, because a lot of stuff does come in from overseas via wholesalers and distributors. So. So it could be topics around, the differences between, the various inventory terms, whether safety time, safety stock, those type of things. Quite interesting discussions around how you might deal with that. So look, I'll work something up with Steve, and we'll get it up to everyone. Hopefully, we can. We'll have another session in the very near future. All right. There's no other questions. The actions I've got is we'll send you the link to this webinar. I'll send you the information around the infection control. And yeah, I think that was it. I can't recall anything else. The 2 notes that I took. So we had a few people, actually about half our people weren't able to attend, but they've indicated that most of them indicated they'll look at the video. So yeah, all good. All right, well, thanks to Keith
Thanks, Frank.
for doing this, mate. Much appreciated, and Keith's a supporter of our organisation, which is great. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing you again in the next month or 2.
Thanks
Goodbye
all.
to everybody.
Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.